What if I told you that one of the most talked about car deals in YouTube history almost happened twice? And the second time around, it didn't just fall apart. It exploded into something nobody saw coming. That's exactly what we're about to unpack today. Because FXAlexG didn't walk away quietly. He came back. He tried again. And this time, Matt Armstrong was watching. Stay with me, because the story, it doesn't end the way you think it does. Let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand why this second attempt sent shockwaves through the entire automotive community, you need to understand what happened the first time. FXAlexG, if you don't know him, you need to, is a content creator who has built his entire brand around one thing: chasing the most insane, most exclusive, most jaw-dropping cars on the planet. We're not talking about your everyday sports cars. We're talking about machines that most people will never even see in person, let alone sit inside. And at the very top of that list, the Bugatti Chiron. A car so exclusive, so outrageously expensive, so impossibly rare, that even the world's wealthiest collectors have to wait years just to be considered for one. So when FXAlexG first announced he was trying to get his hands on a Bugatti, the internet lost its mind. People were glued to their screens. The comments sections were flooded. Everyone had an opinion. Could he actually do it? Would Bugatti even entertain the conversation? And more importantly, what would happen if they said no? Well, we found out, and it wasn't pretty. But here's what nobody knew at the time. That first attempt, it was just the opening act. The real story was still being written, and the chapter that was about to unfold would bring in a name that changed everything. Matt Armstrong. Now, if you're familiar with Matt Armstrong's channel, you already know he's not just a car guy.
Hell no, man. What
The man has built
man?
broken Lamborghinis from scratch. He's flipped cars that every other expert said were totaled. He has an eye for opportunity that very few people in this industry possess. And when Matt Armstrong enters a story, things get serious fast. So the moment his name got attached to this Bugatti saga, the entire community snapped to attention. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because before we get to Matt's account, we need to talk about what actually pushed FXAlexG to try again. Because this wasn't a random decision. This wasn't impulsive. There was a very specific reason he went back for round two. And when you hear it, you're going to understand why the stakes were so much higher the second time around. After the first attempt fell through, FXAlexG didn't disappear. He didn't move on and forget about it. He sat with it. He watched how the community reacted. He paid attention to the conversations happening in the comments, on social media, in the forums. And what he noticed was something shocking. People weren't just curious about whether he could buy a Bugatti. They were genuinely invested in the outcome. This had become bigger than a car purchase. It had become a symbol, a test, a question that the entire automotive YouTube world was asking out loud. Is it even possible for a creator like this to access that level of the hypercar market? And FXAlexG decided he wasn't done answering that question. So he started over. He went back to the drawing board, reassessed his approach, made some changes, and quietly began making moves behind the scenes. And for a while, nobody knew. That's the part that makes this so fascinating. While the internet had moved on, while people assumed the story was over, FXAlexG was still in the game, still pushing, still chasing that Chiron. But here's where the story takes its first massive twist. The process of acquiring a Bugatti, and I mean this sincerely, is unlike anything in the car world. It's not like walking into a dealership. It's not like calling a broker and writing a check. Bugatti operates on a completely different level. There are conversations. There are evaluations. There's a vetting process that goes beyond financial qualification. Bugatti wants to know who you are. They want to understand your relationship with their brand. They want to feel confident that their car is going to the right person, someone who will represent the brand in a way that aligns with their values. And this is where things got complicated for FXAlexG, because being a YouTube content creator, even a massive one, doesn't automatically open those doors. In fact, in some circles, it can actually work against you. There's a certain section of the ultra-luxury car world that views content creation with suspicion. They worry about attention. They worry about privacy. They worry about what happens when something goes wrong on camera and millions of people are watching. So FXAlexG wasn't just fighting for access to a car. He was fighting against a perception A system that wasn't built with creators like him in mind. And that perception? It was about to be challenged in a way nobody expected. Matt Armstrong. Let's talk about him properly now. Because his entry into this story wasn't random, and it wasn't accidental. Matt has something that very few people in this space have managed to build. Genuine credibility on both sides of the fence. The car community respects him. The business community respects him. He's not just a guy who fixes cars on camera. He's someone who understands a market, understands relationships, and understands how to navigate conversations that most people would fumble. When Matt became aware of what FXAlexG was attempting, his reaction wasn't what you might expect. He didn't stand on the sidelines. He didn't just comment and move on. He saw something in this situation that he felt needed to be addressed, needed to be pushed forward, needed to be concluded. And so he stepped in. Now let's be clear about what that means. Matt stepping in doesn't mean he took over. It doesn't mean he overshadowed FXAlex's journey. What it means is that he brought his weight, his reputation, and his network into the conversation in a way that shifted the energy entirely. Suddenly, this wasn't just a creator trying to buy a car. This was a collaboration between two of the most recognizable names in automotive content, both of them pushing toward the same goal. And the Bugatti world? It paid attention. But here's what nobody was talking about publicly. Behind the scenes, there were conversations happening that the audience never saw. There were phone calls. There were introductions being made. There were people in the Bugatti ecosystem who were watching the situation unfold and forming opinions. Some of them were supportive. Some of them were skeptical. And some of them were outright resistant to the idea. Because again, this wasn't just about the money. This was about whether the world of ultra-exclusive hypercars was ready to open its doors to a new kind of buyer. A buyer who documented everything. A buyer whose purchase would be watched by millions. And right in the middle of all that tension, something happened that nobody saw coming. The story leaked. I'm not going to pretend that the community didn't play a role in this, because the moment whispers started circulating that FXAlexG was back at it, that he was making another run at the Chiron, and that Matt Armstrong was somehow involved, the internet did what the internet always does. It ran with it. Speculation exploded. Some people said the deal was already done. Others said it had already fallen apart again. There were rumors about specific numbers, about specific dealerships, about specific timelines. And in the middle of all that noise, the actual truth was being buried under layers of speculation and drama. Which brings us to one of the most important parts of this entire story. The reality of what high-end hypercar ownership actually involves. Because I think a lot of people watching this, even genuinely car-obsessed people, don't fully appreciate the complexity of what FXAlexG was attempting. Buying a Bugatti Chiron isn't like buying a limited edition sneaker. It's not like reserving a spot in a queue and waiting for delivery. The Chiron, depending on specification, the variant, the year, and the market, can cost anywhere from $2 million to well over $5 million. And that's before you factor in insurance, storage, maintenance, and the very specific lifestyle infrastructure that comes with owning a car like that. But more than the money, and this is the part that truly matters, there is the question of relationship. Bugatti is not a transactional brand. They don't just sell cars. They cultivate partnerships. Long-term partnerships. And when someone new enters that conversation, Bugatti is not just asking, can you afford this? They're asking, are you the right custodian for this machine? And for FXAlexG, that question carried enormous weight. So what was the answer? What did Bugatti ultimately make of this second attempt? What role did Matt Armstrong actually play in bringing this to a conclusion? Because here's the thing, and I want you to really sit with this. The conclusion of this story isn't just about whether a car was bought or sold. It's about what the entire journey revealed, about access, about the unwritten rules of the hypercar world, about what it means to be a creator in a space that wasn't designed for you. And this is where the story gets deeply interesting. Matt's involvement brought something to the table that changed the entire framing of the conversation. He didn't just vouch for FXAlexG. He contextualized him. He helped people in the Bugatti world understand the platform, understand the audience, understand the cultural significance of what this purchase would represent. And in doing so, he made a compelling argument that this wasn't just a transaction. This was a moment. A cultural moment that would resonate far beyond a single YouTube video. Think about what that means. When Matt Armstrong walks into a room and says this matters, people listen because Matt has the receipts. He has a track record. He has a project behind him that prove he understands cars at a level that goes beyond aesthetics and clout. And having that voice in FXAlex's corner changed the entire energy of the negotiation. But even with all of that, there were still obstacles. Massive obstacles. Because the world of ultra-luxury cars is conservative by nature. It moves slowly. It values tradition and the idea of a YouTube creator. Someone whose success is measured in views and subscribers. Entering that world as a legitimate buyer was still something that certain gatekeepers weren't ready to accept. And this is the tension that lived at the heart of this story for weeks. On one side, you had FXAlexG and Matt Armstrong pushing forward, making the case, navigating the system with as much grace and strategy as they could. On the other side, you had an industry with its own rules, its own pace, its own definition of who belongs. Something had to give. And when it finally did, when the moment of resolution arrived, it came with a clarity that I think surprised even the people at the center of it, because this story wasn't resolved through force. It wasn't resolved through drama or confrontation or a viral moment. It was resolved through something much more powerful and much more lasting. Legitimacy. Earned, demonstrated, undeniable legitimacy. And here's why that matters for every single person watching this video. Because the story of FXAlex's attempt to buy a Bugatti, with Matt Armstrong stepping in to see it through, is bigger than these two individuals. It's a story about what happens when new voices try to enter established spaces. It's a story about what happens when the rules of an industry collide with the reality of a changing world. It's a story about whether passion, platform, and persistence are enough to break down walls that have stood for decades. And the answer, the final answer that this story delivers, is more nuanced than a simple yes or no. Let me walk you through the final chapter, because this is the part that pulls everything together. After weeks of conversations, after the leaks and the speculation and the community debates, after Matt's involvement shifted the conversation and FXAlex's persistence kept alive, the outcome arrived. And what happened was not what most people expected. The deal was not a straight-line success story. It was not a triumphant moment where FXAlexG drove off into the sunset in a brand new Chiron, while the crowd cheered. Reality is always more complex than the narrative we write for it. What actually happened was something that required everyone involved to look honestly at the situation, at the market, at the timing, and at what was truly possible within the constraints of a world that doesn't bend easily. But here's what made the conclusion so powerful. It wasn't the final decision that mattered most. It was the process. It was the fact that FXAlexG went back, that he tried again, that he pushed harder and smarter and with better support than the first time. And it was the fact that Matt Armstrong, someone who had every reason to stay on the sidelines, chose to get involved, chose to use his credibility to try and move something that mattered. That's the story. That's the thing that will outlast the headlines and the speculation and the comment section debates. Two creators, both deeply passionate about cars, both willing to challenge the limits of what their platforms could accomplish. One trying to break into a world that wasn't built for him. The other putting his reputation on the line to help make it possible. And regardless of how the transaction itself ended, regardless of whether a Chiron changed hands or not, the conversation that this story started is one that the automotive world is still having. Because the question at the heart of it all is one that matters to every creator, every enthusiast, every person who has ever looked at something extraordinary and asked, is that for me? And the answer this story gives us, it's not a door slammed shut. It's a door that has been moved, cracked open. Maybe not all the way, not yet, but moved. And sometimes that's how the biggest changes begin, not with a dramatic breakthrough, but with someone refusing to walk away. FXAlexG refused to walk away. Matt Armstrong walked toward the problem. And together, they moved something that hadn't moved before. That is the story. That is why it matters. And that is why we're still talking about it. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. You don't just want highlights. You want the full story. You want the context, the tension, the real meaning underneath the surface. So do us a favor. Smash that like button right now. because it genuinely helps more people find content like this. Drop a comment below and tell us, do you think FXAlexG will ever get his Bugatti? Because the debate in the comments on this one is going to be wild. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we have more stories coming that you absolutely cannot afford to miss. This community keeps growing because of people exactly like you. We'll see you in the next one. And so here we are, at the end of a story that was never really just about a car. Think about everything that unfolded. Think about the layers. FXAlexG didn't just try to buy a Bugatti. He tried to do something that almost nobody in his position had ever seriously attempted before. He walked up to one of the most exclusive, most guarded, most tradition-protected doors in the entire automotive world, and he knocked. Not once, twice, and the second time, he brought Matt Armstrong with him. That is not a small thing. That is not content. That is not clout chasing. That is someone who